Okay, good morning. Today we are doing Lamed Tesam Bays. We are starting out on the bottom of Lamed Tesam and Aleph. The Gemara said, "Boy Rav Papa Mai the Shifta Mai." What's the halacha when it comes to the water that is cooked with shifta? Shifta is dill. I don't know about you, but my mother-in-law, when she makes chicken soup, she puts in dill. So this question of the Gemara is relevant, at least when I'm by my mother-in-law, or when I was by my mother-in-law. So the Gemara is asking, what is the story with various different things where you take the vegetable and then you cook it? But we had already just said in the previous day, right, in the beginning there from the statements of Rav Papa. Rav Papa said, Pshitali Maya de Silka Kasilka, Maya de Lifta Kalifta, Maya de Kula Shalki Kula Shalki, right? Any of the cooked vegetable water that you made a hadama on it. Again, the machlekes between Rashi and Pes is perhaps exactly what you're talking about in terms of how much of the vegetable is in that water, but that's not for now. And then Rav Papa had a question, and that's what we're starting today. Rav Papa is asking, Maya de Shifta, what's the halacha? What is the story with dill? Dill is not a regular vegetable. Nobody, I don't think, eats the dill. The dill is put in either limtuke taima avdi to sweeten the soup, or maybe it's there to remove something that's negative aspect. The dill somehow removes it. So let's look at Rashi. Maya the shifta the yerek shenais ma'at b'kedera. You put just a little of it in the soup, lematek ba'alma, just to give it some sort of a taste, but not really to eat it. And then Rashi continues, if it's made to really sweeten it, then you make a bracha on the maya of the shifta. You would also make a bracha on that as well. But if it's just there to remove zuama, it doesn't not there for any taste. So then, since it's not giving any taste, then like the dried pepper or like the water when you're drinking it, when you don't have a really need to, it's just somebody who's taking medicine or something. It's in a situation where you're not giving any taste, so then you wouldn't have to make a bracha. The more brings a right Tashma. Hasheves mishenosna tam bekedera ein ba mishum teruma. When you take the dill and you put it into the kedera, so once it gives over its flavor, misha nasna tabe kedera. Once it gave its flavor ready to the pot, ein ba mishum teruma ve'ena mitama tumas eichlin. So then, once you have the dill already sort of used up, it's already put its flavor into the soup, and then there's no issues anymore of truma, and it's not going to be tama tumas oiflim. So what do you see from here? As Rashi points out, you see mishanas nataima, right? When it's giving over its taste, as Rashi says, hashevet imba bevad shala, right? The pieces of the dill mishanasnu b'kder v'tziyua. When you put it into the pot and you take them out, ein ba shuv mishum isa truma dahavle keitz ba'alma. It's not having any issues of truma anymore because it's just considered like a piece of wood. If it would be mixed up with something that wouldn't be true, but it wouldn't be no problems, no issues. And Rashi's lashon is from the fact that the Gemara says that it gave over its taste. Shema minala taima avida. That teaches you that it's being utilized for its taste. It's being utilized because of the fact that it gives over taste. So Shema minala and Tuge Taima says the Gemara avdila. Shema minala. It's a good raya that the shifta, this dill, is being used to add taste. It's not merely there to remove some zuama in the soup. It's there to add taste. It's a flavor that's being added to the dill. And therefore, if you were to cook the dill, the water of it would also get the Bayer Pir Adama. Because obviously it's being done for taste. Good. Now the Gemara has a new question. And the Gemara says as follows: Amar Avchia bar Ashi, pas tzenuma b'kaira. If you have, I was trying to find pictures of it online. I forgot to print one. There's different kinds of soups. I remember having in a few times when you go to these like dinners from yeshiva. Sometimes they serve what looks like bread, and the soup is inside the bread, like an onion soup or something like that. That is not what this is. This is more like a big piece of bread, that is being utilized like a crouton, which you also have like by onion soups. So you take like a big piece of bread and you put it into the soup. And that is, I guess, done by various soups. Maybe by onion soup is one of the types of examples where I've seen it. And so the question that we're asking is in that situation, Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi pas tzenuma bekaira. You have a dried piece of bread that's being put into the bowl of the soup. So Mevarch and Aleh Amaitzi, Rav Chia bar Ashi says that you on that bread you make a hamaitzi. Upliga to Rav Chia, and he's arguing on Rav Chia. The Amar Rav Chia tzarich shetichla brachim hapas, because Rav Chia says no. Rav Chia says that when you are making the bracha of hamaitzi, you're making the bracha on a piece of bread that you're cutting at that point. Meaning, you're not making a bracha of hamaitzi on an already cut piece of bread. Says Rashi, pas tzenuma, this dried piece of bread, it's yavsha, shenasnam b'kaira lishreis. This is a dried piece of bread that they're putting into the soup, lishreis, to soak it. V'chein tzenuma is dakas, right? Where does this come from? Parshas Miketz, at the beginning of the parsha, we talk about the dreams that Parai had, right? So the pasuk over there says, tzenuma is dakas, shtupa is kadim, right? There were these sheaves that they grew. They were very thin. They were very, right? They were weak. So we're talking about when we talk about tznumais bread, we mean a bread that's very dry. So you're putting on this dried bread in order to soak up, the soup, in order to keep it warm. I'm not exactly sure what the whole point of it is when they serve it in sometimes in these dinners, but fundamentally, Rav Chia bar Ashi is saying that you should make a hamaitzi on it, and Rav Chia is saying no, you don't make a hamaitzi on it. Why? Because tzarich shetikla bracha in mapas. Explains Rashi. Birchas hamaitzi and prisas haprusa min hapas. When do you make hamaitzi? You make hamaitzi when you cut the bread. The high paris va'imidu, and this piece is already cut bread, so it's not appropriate to make hamaitzi on it because you should be making hamaitzi on a bread that you're cutting now. Good. So before we go any further, it's worthwhile just to mention this Taisvis because it's a very difficult thing to understand what Rav Chia is saying. Rav Chia is saying that you don't make hamaitzi on a piece of bread. What does he mean? We know that you make hamaitzi on a piece of bread. We just had on Lamed Zayin that even if you have a piece of bread that's even less than a kazayas, you would still make a hamaitzi on it. Maybe you're not going to bench, but you're still going to make a bracha of hamaitzi on it. So look at the bottom Taisvis. Pas tenuma bekaira. If you have a dried piece of bread that's being put into the soup, so mevarchan Allah hamaitzi lechem in haaretz upligat Rav Chia v'imtay mafrek Taisvis. I don't understand. Heichi Mariam yesh shlema lefanav ha'amina b'samoch tekuli alma shlema adif. Is the question that you have a whole piece of bread in front of you, and you have just this soup with this piece of bread in it? Is that the question? Or is the question where you have no other piece of bread there, and you just have the piece of bread of the soup? So it tells you that there can't be a question if you just have a piece of bread in the soup, and there's no bread on the table, then there's no question. Rav Chia wouldn't argue. We already passed before on Lamed Zayin Pruin. Even if you have just a piece, even if you just have a piece of bread, you for sure make a hamaitzi on it. It has a teresa denam. It has a din of bread. So Pesach is saying we have to situate the case correctly. It cannot be that the case is talking about where I have a piece of bread that was given to you in a soup, and there's no bread on the table. Because if that's the situation, Reb Chia agrees that you make a hamaitzi on that bread. No one would argue, because even if you have less than a gazayas, a piece of bread, you have to make a berachas hamaitzi. Again, whether you bench is a different story, but you have to make a hamaitzi. So obviously, says Tes, what we must be talking about is when you have bread on the table, and you have this bread that came in the soup. And Rav Chia bar Ashi is saying that you can make a bracha of hamaitzi on the bread and the soup. And Rav Chia is saying no, you have to make a bracha of hamaitzi on the actual loaf that you have on the table. Says Taisvez, v'yesh lemer ki going to ika shlem lefanav v'boitzim min hatzenuma. Rav Chia bar Ashi saw v'dahavi k'may shlema me'ach shich aviva Mevarach aleh. Rav Chia bar Ashi says, yeah, you have these two options to make hamaitzi on it. You want to eat the soup. You like the bread that's been sitting now in the soup, so you make hamaitzi on that. It's your option. Why? Because what's chaviv comes first. What you prefer to make a hamaitzi over is permitted to make a choice. No. Assume everything. No. Assume everything is excised. Don't the assumptions here are everything is excised. No question. The question is, you have a soup with a piece of bread in it that's cut. It's a kazayas. You have a nice loaf next to you. Which and it's whole. Which one should you choose? According to Rav Barashi, what's more chaviv to you? Is the bread and the soup? So make hametzi on the bread and the soup. According to Rav Barashi, no. You don't have that option. According to, I'm sorry, that's according to Rav Barashi. According to Rav Chia, it's confusing with the two names. But according to Rav Chia, you don't have an option. You have bread in the, you have a nice piece of bread that's in the soup versus a whole loaf. You make a bracha on the whole loaf. Why? Because the preference is to make a bracha on something that's whole that you're then going to cut. Rav Chia bracha in pass. Right, that you first have to finish the blessing, right, with a piece of bread that you're then cutting. You have to finish the bracha with the cutting of the bread. Since this piece is already fully cut, the whole one is preferred. But if there was no piece of bread that was full next to you, so everyone agrees. Everybody agrees that you make on the piece of bread in the soup. Of course, you would make a hamaitzi. Now, continues the Gemara. Rava asks now on Rav Chia, what do you mean that you're saying that you can't make a bracha on the tsnuma? That because mishum dechi kalya bracha prusaka kalya, because when you are going to be making the bracha, you're going to be making the bracha on a cut piece of bread. When you're cutting the piece of bread, you're making a bracha on what's already going to be a cut piece. So what's the difference? Rava is asking on Rav Chia, you seem to think that the whole bread is more chashiv than the cut piece of bread. But I don't understand. When you're making the bracha of hamaitzi, and the understanding is right now that you're in the middle of cutting the bread, so by the time you finish the bracha, you have a cut piece of bread, because you don't want to have a hefsek between the cutting of the bread and the bracha. So the moment you finish the bracha, you have to have a cut piece of bread. So Rav is asking Rav Chia, what's the big gain? Either way, you're making, ultimately, the bracha is finalized on a cut piece of bread, and here, the bread that's in the soup is a cut piece of bread. So what's the big difference? That's a Rava's question on Rav Chia. As we turn the page, now to Lamed Testament base, Elama Rava, Mevarech ve'achagach b'itzeah. Rava says something that is fundamental, that is relevant to all of us. Says Rava, first you make the bracha, and then you break the bread. First you make hamaitzi, then you break the bread. Nerdoi avdik Rav Chia, Rabban avdik Rava. In Nerdo, they used to do like Rav Chia, meaning they would make the bracha, and as they're making the bracha, they would be cutting the bread, so that when they finish the bracha, the bread will be cut, ready to eat immediately, so there will be no hefsek between finishing the bracha and cutting the bread. Right? Rabban avdik Rava, and the rabbis did like Rava, meaning they would first make the bracha, and then they would cut the bread. Ravina merely aim. Ravina says that my mother told me, Avuch avid ki Rav Chia. Your dad, he did like Rav Chia. Right? Normally, this statement of Amrli aim is associated with Abaya. Most times in Shas, Amrli aim is Abaya, and it's always amazing to think about it because Abaya didn't have a parent. His mother was like a stepmother. She adopted him. He was an orphan. He didn't have a mother. But we have two places in Shas where Ravina says Amrli aim. One is over here, where she's talking about what the dad did in relation to, because obviously he was an orphan, he doesn't know what his father did. And so she told him what his father did here in relation to Hamaitzi, that he would hold like a chia, that he would cut the bread as he was making Hamaitzi, and he would have a piece ready to eat as he's finished the bracha. And the other place, Menachas Hamaches, where over there also the mother says that her father, how he used to act with regards to Chodosh. that he wouldn't eat the chadash and elab the orchard the shivsar nahagi temneser until the night of the going into the 18th. Why? Because he held like Rabbi Yehuda and he was chayish for his fake. Fine. So two situations. This is not a testimony, so obviously you could trust the mother. It's not a question of woman or testimony like or anything like that. Continues the Gemara. Some Rabbeinu Amar Li Aim Avoch Avikar B'chiyat Amar B'chiyat Tzar Shtich LeBrachim HaPas Rabban Avdi Kirava. Fine. Says the Gemara concludes V'ilchas LeKirava the Amar Mevarach V'achar Kach B'yitzei. And halachas like Rava, who says that what you do is you first make the bracha of Hamaitzi, and after that you break the bread. Interesting to note, we've already now had two times, right, where Rashi told us on Vehilchasa that we're not Geris. If you look back on Lamed Ches, Rashi said Vehilchasa Loy Garsino, no me halachas Gedai Loisu. That was on Lamed Ches. And then we also had it again. Earlier, right? Where was that? That was on Lamed Zayin on Aleph. Over there, Rashi Divrei Matzkel is Abel Rabbanon Loy. And over there, Rashi says V'loy Garsino Vehilchasa me halachas Gedai Loisu. Over there, those two times, Rashi we're not Geris the Vehilchasa. In one of the places clearly says we are Geris in any event. Over here, Rashi says nothing. Here, Vehilchasa Karava is accepted. Rashi doesn't say anything about it. But Taisus obviously brings it down, and we're going to do this Taisus now, and it becomes the halacha like Rava. So let's look at Taisus. The Hilchas Rava. So what do? You first mevarech, first you make the bracha of hamaitzi, and then you break the bread. That's when you cut. Says Taisus, perish pas. What's the issue? That you don't have a broken piece of bread on achar bracha. I'm sorry, I skipped over Rashi. The time Rashi on the page, Rashi says, "Elam arav and bracha v'chagach b'tzeh v'gem kol bracha v'chagach ma'afish aprusa v'chal yaprocha pas sholim." You make the bracha on a whole piece of bread. So Taisva says that according to Rava, you make a bracha on a whole piece of bread, the whole loaf, and then after that you break the bread. V'yesh shenayim lebarach berachas hamaitzi koydem sheyachtich. This is those who have such a minig that they make hamaitzi before they make any cut in the bread in order to have a pas shlema b'shas bracha. And Tosfos says ve'ein haminig nachan lasis. This is not correct. Why? The have hesach hadas ben bracha la'achila. Because then you're gonna have hesach hadas between the bracha, finishing the bracha, and eating because it's gonna take a while. Cut through the bread after you finish. Go. Says Tosfos, "Umiyu b'Shabbos nachan lahachmir levar kaidem sheyachtach." It says, but on Shabbos, it's good to be machmir and to make a bracha of hamaitzi before you cut the bread. Why? Shalei tishmad yodei levtsoya kaidem shetichla bracha. That you shouldn't be cutting the bread before you finish the bracha. Sha'az lo yesh lechem mishnah. Because then you won't have lechem mishnah. Your breads will already be cut. You won't have the double loaf that we're supposed to have on Shabbos. Later on, we're going to learn Later on, we're going to learn that you have to not just say the bracha, but you have to hear the amen from anybody who's at the meal. So you shouldn't be cutting it before they say amen. And there are those that would like to bring a proof that you have to finish the bracha before you break the bread, and then this brings a raya here from the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi seems to have a different chash. Rabbeinu Yonah also has the big arichas here on this Yerushalmi that they were afraid if they cut the bread beforehand, that maybe it would fall and you had to put the bracha levatol kind of a situation because the bread would fall away. And remember, as we've already explained before, Taisel brought down this Yerushalmi, but before as well, we said when it came to a situation of water, right? You have flowing water. You make a shahakal, you don't worry about the fact that the water that you're making a bracha on now is no longer the water that's in front of you when you finish the bracha, because that's by definition part of what your expectation is when you're making the bracha. But if you're making the bracha on a specific piece of the lupin bean, right, and that bean dropped, so then you would have to make another bracha because you had it specifically in mind on this. So and then Taisus is bringing down this Yerushalmi for an additional point, which is that the Yerushalmi is suggesting that maybe one wouldn't be cutting the bread before one finishes the Hamaitzi in order to be able to ensure that one would not come to a situation of a Brachot of Atala because the piece of bread dropped beforehand. I'm not sure, to be frank, from understanding this, what that would change if you're cutting it afterwards. Is it more likely than not that you would not lose a piece, that it wouldn't drop? I don't see that. I don't see what the difference is. In any event, what we do see from this Taisvis is that on Shabbos, there's a specific point that you have to have the bread be shalem, and the reason that you have to have the bread be shalem is because you want to be doing lechem mishnah. If you look at the Shulchan Aruch, and the Shulchan Aruch brings down this this halacha, so he says as follows. But it said this is in Arachai Kuf Samach Zayin. So Mechaber writes, "But the pas and magam shenaf ha'itev, where you break the bread, where you cut the bread, is where it's most well done, the easiest to cut." And the Mechaber continues, and he says, "V'yachtei prusais habetzia v'tzarich lachtech ma'at shem yeches beprusa yala shar kikar imoy." Now, when you make the cut and the bread, you should be able to not make it all the way through, so that if you would pick up from the side where it's cut, it would nevertheless take the whole loaf with it. Right? Because then it would, if it would come apart, then it would be like just you making a broth on a broken piece of bread, not on a loaf. And you should leave it in that sense whole, but you should have made a cut in there. And again, the reason is because you want to avoid hesach hadas between making the bracha and cutting the bread. This is before the bracha, right? V'yaschel levarach, then you begin to making the bracha. Actually, see my bracha every day, and then when you finish making the bracha, you finish splitting it. So you should finish the bracha when the bread was still whole. Don't make such a tiny piece because then you seem like you're a stingy guy. Don't make a huge piece because then you seem like you're one of these gluttons. The Ramah then continues, and the Ramah writes, "Ubeshabbos lo yachtich bekikar ad achar bracha." And on Shabbos you shouldn't cut the bread until after you made the bracha. On Shabbos you do not make a cut on the bread until after the bracha, because we want to have the loaves be shalem. So the idea of lechem mishnah trumps over the idea of the hesach hadas, over the idea of there being a break between the bracha and the cutting of the bread. Just one thing to note, and maybe some people here have the minig, and maybe some people here have the minig, is that Teres Hakenim, at least this is my minig, that Teres Hakenim writes that v'hamedaktikim, those that are medaktik, regilim lirshem b'sakin kodim bracha, that even though you're not making a cut because it's Shabbos, during the week you would, the Rambam is explaining, you would make a cut in the bread, but not too much of a cut because you still want it to be shalom, but you don't have hesach hadas, so you'd make a little, like the Mechaber says, but only during the week. On Shabbos, because you want to have lechem mishnah, you want to have it to be shalom, so you don't make a cut. Says the Teres Hakenim, the medaktikim are what do you call it? Are running the knife over the bread. Lishem bisakin kind of bracha. They're just sort of making like a sign, but they're not actually making a cut, a major cut in the loaf of bread. This is what do you call it? The practical loaf as brought down, but everybody has their minhag. There are lots of them, and so I'm not getting into any more than that now. Here's the Gemara. Idmar heviu lefneim psisin u'shleimin. So they brought in front of the person pieces of bread and whole pieces. We'll see it's a machlokes Rashi tests, but for our purposes now, we're just going to go with Rashi. Rashi says what happened in In theory, if they have broken pieces of bread and whole pieces of bread, you may be able to make a bracha on the broken pieces of bread. However, if the broken pieces of bread are big, then sarch levarach alein. Then according to Rav Huna, you have to make a bracha on them. So again, according to the way Rashi is learning this Gemara, this is going to disagree, but according to the way Rashi is learning the Gemara, they brought in front of you a whole piece of bread and a broken piece of bread. And we're talking about a situation where the broken piece of bread is significantly bigger than the whole piece of bread. So then, right, you ever notice you go to like a chef brachas and like, everybody's a little bilka, right? And then they cut you the challah from the chassan station like it's ginormous pieces, right? Psisin ushlemet. You have a little bilka in front of you or a big piece, right? So according to Rav Huda, you make a bracha on the broken piece, and then that's pater up the whole piece. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Shlema mitzvah min hamuvchar. You make a bracha on the whole piece. That's a greater, more chashuv thing. Aval prusa shel chitin shlema min hasayin. Divrei hakam mevarach al prusa shel chitin apoites shlema shel sa'irin. However, everybody agrees that if it were of different denominations, right? In other words, if you have the prusa piece, but it's made of something chashuv, it's made out of chita, but the shalem is from the sa'irin, and the shalem is from the sa'irin. So then everyone would agree that the prusa piece, since it's from chitin, goes before the shalem from the sa'irin. I would have thought that what does chashuv mean? Chashuv means because it's chita, it's wheat, it's more chashuv than sa'irin. Tais doesn't say that. Tais says that the reason why it's more chashuv is because if you look in the text of a prusa shel chitin, the skip one text, we'll go down to the next one. Text says the chiti adifa mishum de kadme kra. Right, the person says eretz chito sa'ira. So chita comes before sa'ira. That's why it's more chashuv. Okay, be it as it may. So what is the Gemara telling us? The way Rashi is learning the Gemara, if somebody has a piece of bread which is significantly larger than a whole loaf, then according to Rav Huna, you make a bracha on the piece, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, you make a bracha on the loaf. But everyone agrees, says the Gemara, that if the piece was of wheat and the whole was of barley, then you make a bracha on the wheat piece more than the whole loaf of barley bread. Good. This is they're both sheviminim. Chita u'so'era, eretz chita u'so'era. They're both sheviminim. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba wants to suggest that maybe this machlokes between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan is really like a machlokes tanoim. So he says, "Kit tanoim." Maybe this is like a machlokes tanoim. Tarmim botzel katan sholem avolo chatzi botzel gadol. So we have a situation when it comes to truma. And let's say you had an onion. You have a shalom onion. You have a nice onion, but onions come in many sizes. You have these little tiny onions, right? You can eat them whole, like it's very cute little onions. They make dishes out of them. And then you get these enormous Spanish gargantuan onions that are massive, right? So when it comes to truma, so tarmin batzel cotton shalom avaloi chatzi batzel gadol. According to the Tanna Kama, what you should do is you should give for the truma a nice shalom onion, a whole onion, even if it's tiny, but not even a nice, juicy, big piece, but only from a half of an onion. Says the Gemara, Rav Huda disagrees. Rav Huda Omer, loy ki ela chatzi batzel gadol. You give the bigger piece, right? Since the little tiny onion's a joke compared to the nice half a Spanish onion, you give the big half of the Spanish onion. That what you would give as the truma. My love says the Bar It must be what are they arguing in? The Mar Savar Chashiv Adiv, Mar Savar Shalem Adiv. What must be the machlokes? Is one man the Amar holds that you go after Chashivos, or one man holds you go after Shalem. So the same way that it seems like the machlokes between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan in relation to a Chashiv or Shalem, that according to Rav Huna, the bigger piece, right, is what you made the bracha on, even though it was broken. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, you made a bracha on the shalem. So maybe that's what's going on over here by the truma. So this machlokes from Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan is really a machlokes of the tanoim. That when it came to the small onion versus a nice half of a big onion, according to Tanna Kama, you give over the batzel cut, and according to Rav Yehuda, you give the half an onion, which is much bigger. Says the no, that's not the machlokes here. It's not a vort in the same way that's applicable by Rav Huna Rabbi Yochanan. It's a different point. Explains the Gemara. Hey, Chadika Kain Kuli Amalei Pligi the Chashavadif. Everybody agrees that when it comes to a situation where the Kain's in town, that you give the Chashav a piece more than the Shaling piece. Right? What's the Kain going to appreciate? The tiny little onion or a nice half of a big Spanish onion? Obviously, going to appreciate a bigger piece. He's not going to appreciate a little tiny onion. It's more important than to get more. So give him the more Chashav piece. Don't give him the whole one, even though it's whole. So everyone agrees in that situation. Ki pligi de lekakoin. The argument between Tanakam and Rabbi Huda is not choshev versus shalem. That's not the argument. The argument is if there is no kain present. If there's a kain present, everyone agrees the choshev one goes first more than the shalem. If there's no kain present, the argument is what do you do? The Tanan, according to the Tanakama, when there's no kain present, what you should do is give the kain something that will last. But if there's a kain present, they give him what's the best, what's the yafa, what's the nicest piece. So that is to say, as we just said, there's no machlekes when the kain's present. Rabbi Huda Aimer ain't term and Yafa. Rabbi Huda says no. You always give manay yafa, even when there's no kain present. That is to say, when there's a kain present, everybody agrees to give manay yafa. Everybody agrees to give a piece, the biggest piece that you have, the best piece. Doesn't make a difference if there's a whole one. No disagreement. The question is when the kain's not there. So what's going to last the best in order to get for the kain? According to the Tanakama, is that's the issue. That's what we want to try to provide. Something that's going to be able to last when the kain gets here. So give him the one that's whole, that's going to last more. But according to Rav Huna, no. According to the Rabbi Huda, the halach is you give him an yafa. The kain is not here. Does he appreciate the yafa? It doesn't make a difference. You always give him an yafa. Even if the kain is not here, even if it won't last, you always give him an yafa. So now it's going to come out that it has nothing to do with our machlekes between Rav Huna and Rav Yechon. Rav Huna and Rav Yechon are still arguing about is chashav adif or shalim adif. And here we have a specific situation by Truma. When a kain's present, everybody agrees you give min ayaf min chashav. You don't give the shalim. Question is, if the kain's not around, do you give min amaskayim min ayaf? That has nothing to do with chashav or shalim. That's just a question of a Truma dika halacha, but it wouldn't have an impact on our question. So now we come back to try to answer our question. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak v'Yerushalayim Yotzi Deishtein. Somebody the Yerushalayim should try to be Mekayim both. Should try to be Mekayim. What does it mean both? Try to be Mekayim both the words of Rav Huna and the words of Rabbi Yochanan. So it says the Gemara, Umanu, who was this person? Was the Yerushalayim who tried to be Mekayim both? Mar B'rei Ravina. The Mar B'rei Ravina maniach pusa b'seich hashlem u'beitzea. What would Mar B'rei Ravina do? He would take the broken piece, put it into the shalem, and he would make hamaitzi on both. It was a Tana who was saying over this halakha in front of Nachman Yitzchak, and he said, you take the prusa and you put it inside the shlema, and then you make the hamaitzi, then you break the bread. So you're doing it essentially on both. He said to him, what's your name? Amalei Salmon. He says, my name is Shlomo, right? Salmon. No, right? But it's Salmon, right? So Salmon, yeah. The Rebbe Akiva Eiger points out that this name Salmon is from Rus, right? It's one of the children that are between Rus and David. So Amalei, he plays on his name, Sholem Ata or Shlomo Mishnasecha. Shesamta Sholem Ben Atalmidim. Right, your name is peace, and you brought peace between these two arguing rabbis, Rav Yechon and Rav Huna, and you made peace between them because you're taking the prusa, the broken piece, and putting it into the whole piece and making hamaiti together on both. This is the way the Gemara wants to conclude. And the next part is in relation to Pesach. Maybe we won't have time to do this right now. We'll see. Let's just hurry up. So we have a whole bunch of types. One is who we say, who's the Yari Shemayim who did this? It was Ma'abrei de Ravina. Ma'abrei de Ravina was the Yari Shemayim. So how do we know about Ma'abrei de Ravina was such a Yari Shemayim? Because he was Meniach Pusa B'Seich HaShalema. We also know about it. The Gemara tells us in Psachim Samaches that Ma'abrei de Ravina, he didn't just fast like Ramadan. You know what I mean? The man fasted every day. The Gemara tells us, "Havi Yosef b'ta'anisa levar miyatzarto b'porio mal yom kippur." He was fasting every single day except for obviously Shabbos, Yontif. But in the regular weekdays, he fasted the whole year until the nighttime. The only times he would eat during the day was on Atzeres, on Purim, and on Erev Yom Kippur. And we see he was very machmir on a bunch of things, and he brought his mother into it as well. The Gemara says in Erev and Samachay that Rava says that if lice would bite him, he wouldn't be able to focus on his learning. So Marber Ravina had his mother basically launder him new clothes every single day. Every single day he had a new pair of clothes, so he should never have lice that would be biting, so it shouldn't disturb his learning. And we know about him earlier in the Gemara told us on Lamed Beis Lamed Aleph about the wedding that he made for his son, where he thought the rabbis were being too excited. So what did he do? He broke a really fancy glass to get them to calm down. And at that very wedding, the rabbis were saying, "What should we sing? What should we play?" Violent the bistam, right? We're all dying. Yeah, and hey Torah and hey mitzvah the magnalim, the Torah the mitzvah is going to save us. And then we also had later on, the Gemara is going to tell us on Daled a whole series of stories, a couple of stories about Ma'ar Ber Ravina, all the amazing nisim that happened to him. Okay, so now we see a little bit about Ma'ar Ber Ravina in terms of the fact that he was such a Yerei Shamayim, that he was Meniach Prusa B'Seich HaShlema. As I said, and we didn't really have time to go into this. Taisus disagrees with Rashi. If you look at Taisus and Mevarach al Absis and Apoitas Hashleimin, Taisus has a different approach. We're going to skip the half of Taisus, just go to the end of Taisus. But Taisus al Karchach Pirish Rabbeinu Tam. So Taisus says very different way of learning the Gemara than Rashi. Taisus says that Rabbeinu Tam explained the Ma'ir b'Psisin Gedolim Ushleimim Ketanim. We're talking about a situation where you have big broken pieces, and you have whole small pieces, a whole small loaf. Rav Huna give you the option. You can make a bracha either on the broken pieces that are large or on the whole loaves that are very small. You have a choice. And that's not what Rashi said. Rashi said that the psisin and gedolim, according to Rav Huna, you make the bracha on that, right? Because the choshev is more valuable, right? The better piece is what you make the bracha on Maitzion. And Rav Yochanan disagreed. Rav Yochanan said you make a bracha on the shalem. Taisus saying no. According to Rav Huna, when you have the big psisin, you have the big pieces, and you have the small whole loaf, you have an option. Rav Huna says you make a bracha on either one. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Shleiman Iker. Rabbi Yochanan says you have to make a bracha on the shleimus, right? So what's the difference again? The difference is that according to Rashi, Rav Huna is saying that you have to make a bracha on the psisin because chashav is more adif, and according to Rabbeinu Tam, that Rav Huna is giving you the choice: either you make a bracha on the psisin or you make a bracha on the shleiman. And the Rabbi Yochanan in both cases agrees that you make a bracha on the shleiman. Good. That's Rashi of Taisus. And Taisus says that's the halacha. And it says here, we have to do this, even though I don't really have much to say on it right now, but it's an unbelievable line. Taisus says, V'chein halacha Rabbi Yochanan, the harav Rabbi Yochanan, halacha Rabbi Yochanan. This is a very important thing to know, just in the methodology of Psak, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Because when you have machlekes and of Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan. V'chol sheken legabi Rav Huna, shalach gemoisei shoy talmidish Rav. And who is Rav Huna? Rav Huna is the Talmud of Rav. So of course we're going to say that the halacha is like Rav Yochanan. If when Rav Yochanan and Rav have machlekes, halacha is like Rav Yochanan. Certainly when Rav Huna, who's a student of Rav, is having machlekes Rav Yochanan, the halacha will be like Rav Yochanan. The dafka be'amoyroi basroi, amin halacha basroi. When do we say this idea of that we go, the halacha is like the basroi, the halacha is like the later generations? That's dafka be'amoyroi basroi. That's dafka on later amoyram, but not on somebody who would be of sort of their generation, meaning that Rav Huda is the student of Rav, and he's essentially, presumably taking Rav's opinion, so we're not going to go then and say, oh, it's Basroi because Rav Huda adopts Rav's opinion. No, that's not Basroi. Basroi is on a later generation. After you have a chance to see all the different opinions, that's when you would say halacha is like the Basroi. All right, we'll stop over here.